So we created a simple script to add two numbers together using an interactive script. How would we do that same thing parameterized, where we would put the command and then instead of prompting the user for the numbers, they had to put in the numbers automatically. Or they had to put in the numbers on the command line. There we go. That makes more sense. So let's create a new script. And so we're going to notepad add dash num param.ps1. And yes, we want to create it. Okay, so a parameterized script, before we get into the scripting, we have to define the parameters. So we do this with a param block. So it's param to define parameters, open parentheses, and you can do this all on one line, but it's really much more readable if you break it up. So I'm going to do $num1. Now, actually, let's force that to be an integer. Integer num1. Now, this defines a parameter called num1, so we're giving it a variable name just like we did before. But I'm going to do one more thing this time, and that is I'm going to assign it a value here at the beginning. So I'm going to say equals 0. So what will happen is if somebody doesn't put 1 in, then it will just equal 0. And then I'm going to put all of my parameters separated by a comma. Now again, I'm going to put it on a second line because it's going to make my life easier. It's going to make it easier to read, easier to troubleshoot this later if we need to. So I'm going to say num2 equals 0. And then we're going to close our parentheses. Now that sets our parameter block. So we have two parameters in sequence. One's named num1, one's named num2. All right. Now we're going to get to our scripting portion. So we don't have to prompt for the numbers because they should have been put in on the as parameters. So we can just jump straight to creating a solution. $sol equals $num1 plus $num2. And then we'll output it, write host. The solution is $sol period. Okay, let's see if this works. So I'm going to do File, Save, and I'm going to go ahead and leave this open so I can jump back and forth. And now I'm going to try to run my parameter. So remember, period, backslash to set the location, add dash num param, and this time I'm not going to add the .ps1. I really don't need to because it's going to recognize it. Now my solution is 0. My solution is 0 because I didn't give it any numbers. So let's do add num_param, and I'm going to do 7 this time. And remember, I'm adding two numbers. But what it's going to do is that second value, it's going to take that default that I gave it of 0. So it's 7 plus 0 equals 0. And if I want to do, let's do 7 plus 14, the solution is 21. So my parameterized script is working fine. But it could be a little bit better. So let's go back to our parameterized script down here. And let's say I wanted to make these parameters mandatory. I'm going to require that they be here. So what I'll do is I'll add another line here, and it's going to be parameter. I have to start that in a square block. Parameter, if I could spell parameter, in parentheses, mandatory equals $true. And we do the $true to set that particular value. So there is a Boolean value true. And by doing the $true, we're saying use that value. That way it comes across as the right thing and not just as a text value true or something like that. So the square blocks identify this is an option for the parameter. And the option we're using is mandatory equals true. That makes this a mandatory parameter. Now I'm going to put that before both of these. So that should make both of those mandatory parameters. So let me save. And now if I do 7 and 14, it works fine. But if I just do nothing, it says we can't do this. Supply values for the following parameters. Num1, I'm going to do 5 and 12, and now it'll do it. In fact, if I do param4, it's still going to see it's going to take that and it's going to assign it to num1, but it still requires me to put in a value for num2. So now I have a script that is running via parameters rather than interactively. So back here real quick, it's all defined by this param block, and then we give it the value. Now, because I've made these mandatory, I actually don't need this default assignment anymore. You really only need that default assignment when your parameters are not mandatory. So let me go ahead and save it, run my script again, and 4 plus 6 equals 10, so it works just fine without me assigning those default values, which I don't need because they're now mandatory and we have to put in something. So this does the exact same function as the interactive script before. We're just doing it with parameters rather than doing it with an interactive script and prompting the user for the data.